straight on now to the final presentation of this morning, which will focus on Hungary. So we have two speakers here. There's Tibor Rácz and Edith Sárosi. Tibor is an archaeologist at the Ferenczy Museum Centre and head of the Community Archaeology Association in Hungary. He's been primarily researching the birth of the Hungarian village system in the High Middle Ages, has dedicated several studies to analysing the effects of crucial political events such as the conquest of the Carpathian Basin, the foundation of the Hungarian state and the Mongol invasion on contemporary life and material culture. Edith Sárosi is head of department at the Department of Ancient History in the Budapest History Museum. She's mainly interested in the landscape of medieval rural settlements in Hungary, and especially studies in the development and changes in the pattern of habitation, the interrelated land management systems in the late medieval period, and the ecology of settlements. So Tibor and Edith are going to be talking about infrastructure archaeology and medieval rural settlement in Hungary. Thank you very much, both of you. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Karenza. First, greeting from Hungary, and thanks for the invitation. Our presentation, as you told, will be made up of two parts. First, I will speak about the general context and background of infrastructure archaeology in Hungary in general, and then Tibor will show in what way these developments influence the study of medieval rural settlements in Hungary. So please, Tibor, the first slide.
I already started sharing. Can you not see it?
Next. Yeah, okay, it's okay. Next one, please.
Next one, okay.
Okay, thanks. So first, let me show you some general facts about the infrastructural developments of Hungary in the last 30 years. When speaking about large scale and infrastructure, one tends to think mainly of building of roads, railways, but one should not forget about other elements of general infrastructure, such as flood prevention, industrial zones, residential areas, pipelines, wind, solar energy parks, etc. And these projects also played a crucial part in the last decades in Hungary and the development of archaeology. So first, let's see some facts about road and railway developments. To put the story into context, one has to remember that in the 1990s was not only so these years not only mark a milestone in the history of Hungary, but also a landmark in the history of Hungarian archaeology, as following the collapse of communism, parallel with the introduction of market economy, the Hungarian government set up new nationwide infrastructural programs that Hungary be an integral part of the pan-European traffic system, that is the so-called Helsinki corridors. These have been and are, in fact, very, very long-term projects. The latest plans haven't targeted completion date in 2030. The plans included and include the significant expansion of the underdeveloped motorway and railway system in the first place. The process speeded up after 2004 when Hungary joined the EU, and from 2007 when the country was applying for financial resources from the Union. As you can see on my first slide, the total length of motorways was only 325 kilometers in 1989, and by 2021 the total length was more than 2,000 kilometers. So more than 2,000 kilometers of motorways have been built in the last 30 years. This brought the immense rise in the number of archaeological sites. As you can see, some two examples in the below rows depicting newly discovered chains of archaeological finds. These are depicted with pink dots or spots or patches. So please, the next slide. Okay, some more examples of large-scale infrastructural developments. One is flood prevention, which has immense impact on archaeological heritage in general. This slide shows the so-called Vásárhelyi Plan, which is also a long-term project and aims at preserving territories from dangerous floods in the River Tisza basin. And all the investments connected to this are really has an impact on the heritage located in the banks of the rivers. Okay, next slide. Another very important area of development of the last 2 decades is the creation of huge industrial zones around major towns in Hungary, which are partly the reuse of gray or brown areas, but they often occupy reclassified arable fields or grasslands. And in many cases, this brings up public outcry, either because of the misuse and destruction of natural environment or the possible pollution of the industrial activities. Anyway, from archaeological point of view, these developments again provide vast areas and surfaces for archaeological investigation and result in the discovery of numerous new archaeological sites and possibilities for large-scale research. As you can see in these examples shown by this slide, the 2 selected examples include Kecskemét and Debrecen, when 2 or 3 huge industrial parks were created in the last years. The Kecskemét Mercedes-Benz factory site is more than 800 hectares, and in Debrecen there is also a 400-hectare industrial park for a car factory, and another one which exceeds 100 hectares. So you can see the immense territory involved in these projects. Okay, next slide, please. Some words about the context, the legal context of preventive archaeology in Hungary, because it's an important factor when dealing and understanding all these processes. So there are some major principles. Archaeological artifacts in Hungary are found in the ground as state property. In Hungary, everything has to be excavated, so we don't really have priorities or site selections. All archaeological features must be documented and collected. I would like to call attention that we have legislation for preservation of built heritage. So built heritage, meaning walls, are not automatically ruined. There were some good examples connected to motorway excavations and railway excavations when, for instance, a Roman villa or medieval church was avoided by the actual fieldwork of the investors. And another one is that we have a special category of major investments, which are dealt in special procedures, and we have an official or public price for archaeological activities in Hungary. Archaeological prospection is paid by the hour, and the basic price for 1 square meter of excavation is around €6.5 this day. But this price may go depending on the intensity of the site, and it can go up as high as €161 in case of very intensive urban context. Another important component in the administration is the presence of a central coordination body or institution from 2007 onwards, which is responsible for the primary heritage assessment of capitalism investments and the coordination and partly the execution of archaeological fieldwork in case of these major investments. And this institution is today the National Institute of Archaeology, run by the Hungarian National Museum. And at last, a further important element in the system is that in case of major investment, it is obligatory for the developers to have a preliminary archaeological heritage assessment done by the previously mentioned central coordination body. And this assessment usually includes, beside a complex collection of history, cartographic and archaeological data, field walking, aerial photography, geophysical survey, trial trenching. And based on all these basic information, the assessment provides a risk assessment, includes and the estimated length and costs of the archaeological works that has to be done. At last, some words about the institutional background of preventive archaeology. As you can see, there is an enormous or industrial scales of fieldwork proposed and done by various parts of the country, and this requires intensive archaeological presence and cooperation. The continuous and intensive on-site work is significantly different from what we have experienced in previous practices in the last decades. According to a study from 2016, in the last decade, approximately 10 million square meters had to be investigated annually, which meant that, and still means, a huge pressure on archaeology. In Hungary, as you can see, traditionally, the archaeological work is based on these institutions, county museums, town museums, and the work of the Hungarian National Museum, which runs this National Institute of Archaeology. Today, universities are involved. The Archaeological Institute of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences has a role, and also private companies appear in Hungary, but they have a limited role, and they are licensed to participate in only with providing manual labor and geodetic surveys today. So the preparation for this type of large-scale rescue work requires a new approach, involvement of enlarged professional staff, enlarged storage capacities, beside the implementation of new strategies and techniques concerning the fieldwork. All in all, these processes leads to an appearance of project management approach, standardization of and rethinking of fieldwork practice. And as a result, national scale protocols as well as standards are now available, not only in the areas of on-site excavation, but post-excavation works, documentation, and environmental analysis, archaeometry, or conservation. And after this short introduction, I would like to pass the word to Tibor to speak about the other aspects.
Thank you, Edith. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I hear you.
Okay, so archaeology has changed profoundly in the past 30 years. Starting from the 90s, large-scale excavations were dominating the field of archaeology, which has a huge effect on scientific research also. Investors are bound by law to finance the excavation of affected sites, the conservation, primary processing, and inventory of finds. However, they cannot be obliged to support scientific evaluation and dissemination of results among the public, and there are no additional resources for this in the cultural heritage institutions. The developers of the medium-term archaeological strategy stated that the general public could not benefit from the results of the research carried out mainly through the public funds, and that the level of scientific processing is extremely low. At the same time, these excavations have opened up new opportunities in the research of medieval settlements, especially concerning the evaluation of material culture types of residential buildings and settlement structure. So in the following minutes, I shall briefly relate on some larger research projects and their scientific results or research potentials. I have to mention several studies right at the beginning, which specifically discuss the processing of medieval materials of large-scale excavations. In 2010, Miklós Takás summarized the research into medieval settlements with an appendix listing 449 medieval sites. Already in the 90s, he gained some experience in large-scale excavations and recognized the potentials of the new source material. And throughout his professional career, he strived for the scientific evaluation of these large-scale projects. In his 2017 article, he gave a brief assessment of the situation, referring to the unfavorable legal regulations. So he recommended the application of new strategies for the processing of the huge amount of archaeological material in medieval settlement research, and he proposed the formation of research groups with the involvement of external funds. He encouraged full-scale processing and a holistic approach, since previously research had only worked on smaller parts of settlements or selected types of objects. And he also drew attention to methodological aspects and standards. As for the publications, they truly reflect the scale of processing and evaluation. The trend emerges that the first major excavations were professionally exploited, with less and less interest and resources remaining as time went on. So if we divide the publications into three groups, almost all excavations appear in the first category, the excavation report category, since this is a legal obligation. These are short text summaries containing only basic data. On the second level of publications is the preliminary publication of data. This situation is not so bad in this respect. Most highway excavation projects have issued such publications which contain a wider range of results and sporadically deeper analysis also. So currently this is the best and fastest way to get a line about medieval settlement research in Hungary. The first issue of this kind was the 1997 issue of Paths into the Past with English translation of the texts, which was followed by the 2003 publication of the results achieved during the M5 highway excavations led by Csongrád County Museums. And this is in fact a study volume, including preliminary reports on medieval sites also. And on the right side, you can see an issue of one of the greatest archaeological projects ever conducted in Hungary, the highway M0, which is placed around the capital and partly in Pest County. Edith Tori was coordinator of the works, published some methodological studies on the lessons learned, and also a volume presenting shortly all the excavations. So we can find here data on more than 50 different sites. The Budapest History Museum published already 2 large volumes on the results of excavations led in the capital, bearing the name Treasures Under the City, and these include also catalogs of finds with excellent pictures. And one more volume, Rolling Time. Studies published here go beyond the level of preliminary reports. We have to mention that all these publications were accompanied by temporary exhibitions, and most volumes include English abstracts. However, there's a negative trend which must also be emphasized here. Since 2007, a single volume of this kind has been issued. The third level publications, that of the monographs, the situation is very disappointing. I can report the publication of a single volume, which I present later. Now let's go to the projects. The village of Kano, which was discovered in the 11th district of Budapest, was for a long time the only high medieval settlement fully excavated in Hungary. The unearthing of the village and coordination of the work was carried out by György Terei. You can see his picture. It was between 2003 and 2005, and later in 2010 he wrote a thorough preliminary report on the results of the excavation. There was a church which was built sometime in the middle of the 12th century, cemetery dated to the 12th and 13th century, and the same is valid for the settlement. Only a few finds can be dated to the 14th century. We assume the inhabitants probably fled during the Mongol invasion. 2 types of houses were distinguished with different orientation, probably indicating chronological differences, but unfortunately this can only be clarified by processing the material, which has not yet happened. The leader of the excavation assigned the excavation material to several researchers for processing, and this proved to be a very good idea because additional publications appeared besides the preliminary reports. And one of the results was the processing of iron finds in 2 separate publications in 2007, real professional achievement. There were countless other interesting and rare finds, which also appeared in several different publications, but the monographic processing still awaits here. Another gigantic project of Hungarian medieval settlement research was the Mercedes plant in Kecskemét. This turned out to be the second location in Hungary where not only scattered houses were unearthed, but an entire medieval village with 124 houses. And in fact, we talk about 2 separate settlements which were found next to each other. And this topographical situation is exciting in itself because these 2 settlements were used at the same time, and they were both surrounded by settlement boundary ditches. On the western and eastern sides of the larger settlement, which you can see on the left side, houses and workshops were built on smaller elevations, while between them, in a valley-like depression, there were some wells established. The two settlements were inhabited from the middle of the 12th century to the beginning of the 13th century. Nicoletta Lukács, you can see her picture, is processing the material in the frames of a PhD dissertation. Work has begun years ago, but so far a single study has been published dealing with the smoke conduction of two selected houses. And the excavation has not yet produced any further scientific results. So it is a typical situation. She is spending all her time on other large-scale excavations. She doesn't have time to write scientific articles. 10 years ago, in 2013, a research team was formed under the leadership of Miklós Takács to tackle the scientific problems of settlement archaeology. The project was financed by the National Scientific Research Fund and aimed to understand the changes in settlement network and landscape from the decline and fall of the Avar Khaganate through the Hungarian conquest and to the foundation of the Hungarian state. And it also involved the processing of materials obtained in large-scale and smaller research excavations. The team members belonged to a younger generation of archaeologists. They were employed in different institutions across the country. And this project brought to the surface the main problems of settlement research in Hungary. It initiated discussions and reflected on several scientific questions like the survival of the Avar population, relationship between the 10th and 11th century settlements. This is especially significant because of the arrival of Hungarians into the Carpathian Mezin, and also discussions were done on the internal structure of settlements and pottery-based chronology. Unfortunately, the cooperation of the working group was limited only to the duration of the project. This cooperation and subsequent individual performance of the participants, however, brought a series of new results into settlement archaeology. You can see some of the participants here. Melinda Takács worked on chronological classification of late Avar and early Árpád age pottery. Sabina Merva, another member of the research team, initially focused on the identification of the first settlements of Hungarians. She soon realized that 10th century materials cannot be separated from 8th, 9th century pottery and settlements. And she processed some materials of large-scale excavations like Mémfőcsarnok, which was found on the line of M1 highway. And later in her PhD, she discussed what role the northeastern part of Transdanubia could have played in the 9th century in the life of Carolingian province of Pannonia. And for this, she also used archaeological materials from large-scale excavations. She researched two microregions and mainly pottery, including the large-scale excavations of Mémfőcsarnok. Here, 6,600 early medieval ceramic and metal artifacts were examined, and a total of 76 buildings. And one of the results, of the main results, was the ceramic analysis and the definition of former spectrum of different periods. And approaching to the end, I wish to present briefly my contribution to medieval settlement archaeology. In the above research project, I processed the archaeological materials of Vácz, which was a settlement dated back to the 9th century, and later a power center of the Árpád dynasty and the bishopric founded in the 11th century. In my work, in my PhD, however, I concentrated on the pottery dwelling structures as well as the evolution of settlement networks on a sample area, which was subjected to intensive archaeological surveys, as you can see it on this map. It's a geographical region which is set in the center of the medieval Hungarian kingdom, the Pest Plain, and I also examined some neighboring regions, and the end results were published in 2019 by Pázmány Péter Catholic University. And so far,
We've got about a minute, Tibor.
This is the only monograph on medieval settlements based on large-scale excavations. So without lingering too long on these excavations, just a few words on the processing. First of all, I dealt with the finds, the material culture, and the interpretation of the observed phenomena. I set up a typology for pottery and dwelling structures from the 10th to the 14th century. And I was interested mainly in the dynamics of changes, the characteristics of the once existent settlement forms. And turning to conclusions, as you could see, medieval settlement research has been experiencing an extremely intensive period since 1990s. So if there was any advancement in settlement research, it is due to large-scale projects. The excavations gaining a new impetus were stimulated primarily not by scientific goals, but by large-scale investments, particularly by road track constructions, and the location, time, and circumstances of these excavations were not defined by scholarly arguments, but by pressure of the economic sector. And thus the data collected is much more subordinated to eventuality and randomness. These excavation projects sometimes overspread several tens of thousands of square meters and lasted for years and had a very, very complicated budget and caught archaeology by surprise. So a very long formative period had to pass to deal with these kind of projects. Museums were and are operating within a local hierarchical system based on the counties, and they use their own procedure and protocol instead of a nationwide unified convention. So a few years ago, Archaeo database became available, comprising basic data on all excavations, but alas, you can find data at the individual museums. But apart from the new challenges, and we have to mention some planned excavations, research excavations, which were also conducted. And in fact, materials were not processed as much as they should have been. And this also contributed to the fact that even though an intensified growth of data was witnessed, the theoretical and methodological background of the field remained uncompleted for long. And thank you for your attention.